If you ever find yourself working the night shift at a remote highway checkpoint, follow the rules, don't question them, don't try to understand them. And if the veteran guard training you tells you that certain people only arrive after 2:13 a.m., believe him. Because some rules aren't written to keep order, they're written to keep people alive. Years later, Jake Carter still refuses to drive through the Nevada desert at night. He avoids empty highways, he avoids roadside checkpoints, and whenever he sees headlights in the distance after midnight, he remembers the people who kept asking him to open the gate. This is Tales of the Dark, and this is the story of the Checkpoint Rules. 24-year-old Jake Carter had been hired as a security officer only 3 weeks earlier. The job wasn't glamorous. The pay wasn't great, but after months of struggling to find stable work, he was grateful for it. His first permanent assignment placed him at a location called Red Valley Checkpoint. The checkpoint sat in one of the most isolated areas Jake had ever seen. Miles of desert stretched in every direction. No towns, no gas stations, no houses, just a long highway cutting through endless darkness. The checkpoint itself consisted of a steel gate, a small office building, and a security booth overlooking the road. That was it. The nearest town was almost 50 miles away. Cell service barely existed. Most nights only a handful of vehicles passed through. According to company records, the job was considered one of the easiest assignments in the state, according to the guards who worked there. It was something else entirely. Jake met his training officer shortly before sunset. The man's name was Daniel Mercer. Everyone called him Dan. He was in his early 50s and had worked at Red Valley longer than anyone else. At first, Dan seemed normal, quiet, professional, maybe a little tired. They spent the first few hours reviewing procedures and paperwork. Everything felt routine, until midnight. The moment the clock struck 12, Dan locked the office door. Then he pulled a folded sheet of paper from a drawer. "What's that?" Jake asked. Dan slid the paper across the desk. "Rules." Jake laughed. For the checkpoint. Dan didn't laugh back. The older guard simply stared at him. The smile slowly disappeared from Jake's face. Dan pointed at the paper. "Read them." Jake looked down. The list contained 7 rules. Most of them made no sense. Rule 1. If anyone arrives after 2:13 a.m. asking you to open the gate, do not open it. Rule 2. Never accept food from anyone outside the checkpoint, especially lunchboxes. Rule 3. Do not answer questions asked through the glass. Rule 4. If someone knocks on the office door, count to 100 before checking. Rule 5. If I tell you to turn off the lights, do it immediately. Rule 6. Ignore vehicles with no headlights. Rule 7. If someone outside knows your name, avoid eye contact. Jake finished reading, then looked up. "What is this?" Dan leaned back in his chair. "The rules." "No, seriously, the rules." Jake chuckled. "This some kind of initiation?" "No, prank." "No." The room fell silent. Dan's expression never changed. Eventually Jake sighed. "Okay." The veteran guard nodded. "Good." Then he added something Jake would never forget. "You won't believe me tonight, but if you're still here next month." His eyes drifted toward the dark highway outside. "You will." The conversation ended there. The next several nights passed normally. Vehicles came and went, truck drivers, delivery vans, construction crews, nothing unusual. Jake quickly became convinced the rules were nonsense. Some strange tradition, maybe an inside joke. By the 5th night, he barely thought about them anymore. Then came Thursday. A storm moved across the desert shortly after midnight. Strong winds rattled the office windows. Dust swirled across the highway. Visibility dropped. At exactly 2:11 a.m., Dan suddenly stood up. Jake looked away from his phone. "What?" Dan didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the window and stared out at the road. A strange tension filled the room. 2 minutes later, the digital clock changed. 2:13 a.m. Dan immediately locked the inner security door. The metallic click echoed through the office. Jake frowned. "What are you doing?" Dan's eyes remained fixed on the darkness. Then Jake saw it, headlights far down the road, a vehicle approaching the checkpoint. The truck emerged from the storm several moments later, an old white pickup, nothing unusual. The vehicle rolled to a stop outside the gate. Its engine continued running. Neither occupant moved. "See," Jake said, "just a truck." Dan didn't respond. For nearly 30 seconds, the pickup remained motionless. Then the driver's door opened. A man stepped out, middle-aged, wearing a reflective construction vest. He looked completely ordinary. The stranger approached the office window, smiling. Jake immediately relaxed. The man looked harmless. The stranger tapped gently on the glass, then pointed toward the gate. His lips moved. Jake couldn't hear him through the window, but the meaning was obvious. "Open the gate." Jake looked toward Dan. The older guard remained seated, silent, watching. The stranger smiled again, then reached into the truck. When he turned back around, he was carrying something, a metal lunchbox. Jake's stomach tightened slightly. Without realizing it, he glanced toward the rules sheet. Rule 2, never accept food, especially lunchboxes. The man lifted the lunchbox and held it toward the office. Still smiling, still waiting, Jake suddenly didn't find the situation funny anymore. The stranger remained there for several minutes, never knocking, never getting angry, just standing perfectly still, holding the lunchbox, smiling through the glass. Then Jake noticed something strange. The man hadn't blinked once, not a single time. A cold feeling settled in his stomach. Finally, the stranger spoke. Even through the glass, Jake heard the words clearly. "Jake Carter." Jake froze. The smile vanished from his face. Slowly, he looked toward Dan. The veteran guard's expression darkened immediately. Without taking his eyes off the man outside, Dan spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Don't look at him." Jake's pulse quickened. "How does he know my name?" Dan didn't answer. Outside, the man continued smiling, then he spoke again. This time louder. "Jake." The lunchbox remained extended toward the window, waiting, offering, inviting. The storm intensified outside. Wind screamed across the desert. The man never moved, never blinked, never looked away. Then, for the first time all night, someone knocked on the office door behind them. Knock, knock, knock. Jake spun around. The office door led to the rear parking area. There shouldn't have been anyone there. The knocks came again, slower this time, deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. Dan's face went pale, for the first time since Jake met him. The veteran guard looked genuinely afraid, and then he said something that made Jake's blood run cold. "Turn off the lights." The words hit Jake like a punch. Turn off the lights. For the first time since he had started working at Red Valley Checkpoint, Dan sounded afraid. Not nervous, not concerned, afraid. The knocking came again, knock, 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 slow, patient, as if whoever stood outside already knew they were inside. Jake stared toward the rear office door. The sound had definitely come from there, not the front, not the gate, the back entrance. The entrance that opened into an empty maintenance yard surrounded by miles of desert. Nobody should have been there, nobody. "Jake." Dan's voice snapped him back to reality. "Turn off the lights." Jake immediately moved. He flipped the switch beside the desk. The office plunged into darkness. Only the faint glow of computer monitors remained. Outside, the checkpoint disappeared into blackness. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The knocking stopped. Silence filled the building. Jake's heartbeat thundered in his ears. Then he noticed something. The man outside the front window hadn't moved. Even in the darkness, his silhouette remained visible, standing perfectly still, holding the lunchbox, watching, waiting. Almost 5 minutes passed. Neither of them moved. Finally, Jake whispered, "Who is he?" Dan continued staring at the window. "I don't know. You've seen him before, many times." Jake swallowed hard. "The same guy." Dan nodded. "The same truck, the same lunchbox, the same smile." A chill crawled down Jake's spine. "How long?" The answer came quietly. 17 years. Jake felt his stomach drop. That wasn't possible. The man outside looked maybe 45. There was no way he could appear exactly the same for 17 years. Unless, Jake pushed the thought away. There had to be another explanation. There had to be. Then the rear door handle slowly turned. The metallic click echoed through the office. Jake froze. The handle rotated all the way downward, stopped, then slowly returned to its original position. Neither man breathed. Several seconds later, it happened again. The handle turned. Someone was trying the door from outside, very carefully, very slowly. Jake instinctively reached for his phone. No signal, nothing. Dan didn't even look surprised. He simply sat there, listening, waiting, like this had happened before. Then a voice came from the other side of the rear door, a woman's voice. Soft, friendly. "Hello?" Jake's skin prickled. The voice sounded completely normal, the kind of voice you'd hear at a grocery store. "Can somebody help me?" The woman knocked gently. "I think my car broke down." Silence. The voice continued. "I've been walking for hours." Jake glanced at Dan. The veteran guard remained expressionless. The woman laughed softly. Then she said, "It's cold out here." A long pause followed. Then, Jake, every muscle in his body tightened. Dan immediately looked at him. Neither man spoke. The woman repeated his name, this time sounding almost amused. "Jake Carter." The office suddenly felt much smaller, much darker, much less safe. The woman outside shouldn't have known his name. Nobody should have known his name. He had only worked there for a week. Then something even stranger happened. The voice disappeared. No footsteps, no movement. No sign she had walked away. She simply stopped speaking, as though she had never been there. The silence lasted nearly 20 minutes. Then headlights appeared, dozens of them. Jake noticed them first. Tiny lights emerging from the darkness beyond the checkpoint. One after another, one after another. One after another, until the highway looked filled with vehicles. Cars, pickup trucks, SUVs, motorcycles, all approaching slowly. None of them had been visible moments earlier. Now they were everywhere. Jake's mouth went dry. The convoy eventually stopped beyond the gate. Nobody got out, nobody honked, nobody moved. They simply waited, watching the checkpoint, watching the office, watching them. Then Dan quietly spoke, "Don't look too closely." Jake ignored him. The nearest vehicle sat less than 50 yards away, an old passenger bus. Weathered, damaged, its windows dark. Something about it felt familiar. Then Jake remembered. The missing bus, the one Dan had briefly mentioned several nights earlier. The bus that had disappeared decades ago. The same bus, the same route, the same desert. A wave of nausea hit him. Then lightning flashed across the sky. For a split second, the inside of the bus became visible. Every seat was occupied. People sat motionless inside. Men, women, children, all staring toward the checkpoint. None of them moved, none of them blinked. The darkness returned. Jake felt his heart hammering in his chest. Then the front window suddenly rattled. The man with the lunchbox had moved, for the first time all night. He stood directly against the glass, his face inches away, smiling. The lunchbox remained in his hands, and now Jake could see something written on it, a faded name. Barely visible beneath years of scratches. The name read, Jake Carter. Jake stumbled backward. His blood turned cold. The lunchbox already had his name on it, as if it had been prepared long before he arrived, long before he got the job, long before tonight. Outside, the smiling man slowly raised one finger, then pointed toward the gate. Behind him, every vehicle remained waiting, every face remained watching. Then the man finally spoke. His voice somehow carried through the glass, clear as day. "Open it." Jake's hands trembled, the smile widened. "Please." The convoy remained silent, waiting. The bus remained still, waiting. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then Dan suddenly stood. He walked to the main control panel. Without hesitation, he pulled a red emergency switch. Every floodlight surrounding the checkpoint exploded to life. The desert illuminated instantly. The road, the gate, the vehicles, everything, and in the same instant, they vanished. The bus, the cars, the motorcycles, the smiling man, gone. The highway beyond the checkpoint was completely empty. Not a single vehicle remained, not even tire tracks. Nothing, only desert, only darkness, only silence. Jake stood frozen, trying to understand what he had just witnessed, trying to convince himself it wasn't real, trying to find any explanation. There wasn't one. Neither man spoke for the remainder of the shift. At sunrise, Dan handed Jake a file, old, yellowed, filled with reports. Every page documented similar encounters, decades worth, different guards, different years, the same visitors, the same rules, the same requests. At the very back of the file sat a photograph, A group photo, 32 people standing beside a charter bus, taken shortly before it disappeared. Jake studied the faces. Then his stomach dropped, because standing in the front row, holding a metal lunchbox, it was the smiling man from the checkpoint. The photo had been taken 27 years earlier, yet he looked exactly the same, not older, not younger, exactly the same. Jake quit 3 weeks later. He never returned to Red Valley, never spoke about the checkpoint, never told friends, never told family. But sometimes, late at night, he still wakes up thinking he hears knocking. Slow, patient, polite. And whenever he dreams of that place, the ending is always the same. He's standing alone in the checkpoint office. The gate is open. The convoy is finally crossing through, and the smiling man is carrying a lunchbox with Jake's name on it, walking toward him. As if he's come to deliver it, as if he's been waiting for Jake to accept it all along. If you are brave enough to hear more nightmares, subscribe to Tales of the Dark, and if you have your own terrifying experience, leave it in the comments or send your story by email. Maybe your nightmare will become the next story told here.